instructors, we want students to learn baseline knowledge, and we also want students to learn skills. Think about the times that we say, gee, students don't prepare for class. They're not reading my material. They're not doing what I want them to do. And somehow we think that when they come into classroom and we jabber at them for 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour, that becomes learning. Well, we know, of course, that learning isn't all about telling people. Learning is about guiding people into a subject matter. So what we've done with, what I've done with flipped classes and what many of my colleagues have done is consider what should students and what can students do outside of the classroom, how much we can hold them accountable for what they're doing outside of the classroom, as well as what we want them to do when we're all together in a classroom setting.
Professor Kids' flipped class is a lot different from the other classes I've taken. I didn't know it was a flipped class initially, but I thought it was going to be more, you go to an online class on Monday and then you go to the actual class on Wednesday, but it was actually a lot more different in that the classes and readings that you do for Monday are actually not necessary, you don't sign in anywhere. It's more that it's understood that you do the readings and you watch the videos for the classes for Wednesday. And it's almost like it's the next transition into real life in that you're not expected to go to the classes, you're not expected to do these things, but they do impact your grade and they impact the group that you're in, and it's sort of a personal responsibility for you to go to the class.
Class is very team-oriented, and having the once-a-week meeting time really allows us to go outside and learn and collaborate on our own time, but then also to come together as a cohesive class and learn together and build off of each other. And that dynamic was really wonderful in the learning environment.
The flipped classroom is all a buzz right now in higher ed, and essentially what it means is this. We take the usual classroom format, which means working as a student outside of class in preparation for a lecture, coming into class, listening to a lecture and taking notes, and going back to their room or the library and working out problem sets or homework that makes them synthesize and work through what they have read and heard. What the flipped classroom does is ask students to prepare in advance of that class in such a way that when they come into class, rather than listening, they are actually doing. And those activities might take a variety of tacks like teamwork or discussion, games or projects, or even class presentations. Then the homework that follows might be a brief follow-through or a reflective piece, something about their metacognition, how and why I learned this, and then they prepare for the next class. So essentially what we're doing is holding our students accountable for the things that we always thought they were doing anyway. And the ways in which IU holds our students accountable is through a thing called just-in-time teaching. Once students are given a video perhaps to watch or a piece of reading to do, we create a small assessment, if you will, a test, a quiz, some sort of gradable short thing that indicates that the students have prepared that material in the ways in which we have wanted them to, so that when they arrive in class, they are ready to start doing something rather than passively listening and learning there only.
Now, the way that plays out in a class for me is that I have them read the material before class. Novel thought, isn't it? But I think about it differently. In the past, I would think about reading some material and then I was going to talk about it. Now I expect them to read material and truly understand what's in the material. But I think a lot of times I can read something and maybe the first time I get it, I don't get it, I don't really understand it, I've just kind of read through it. But if I can talk to somebody else, kind of like a book club, if I can talk to somebody that's also read that material, we can exchange thoughts, we can say, what did you get out of it? Is that what you see? Is that what I see? Let's put our thoughts together. Then we end up benefiting. And in that scenario, I, as an instructor, am completely out of the way.
It was definitely a bit of an adjustment. I know that I would have class from 11:15 to 12:30 on Monday, but I didn't really have class, so you sort of were expected to take that time for that class. And it was weird because, I mean, there's always that temptation to just like, you can do it later, or you can do it the night before your Wednesday class. But I actually found that with that extra time, I did actually end up doing all of the stuff, and that way I was more prepared whenever I went to the class on Wednesday.
So we set this up where they read the material outside of the class. They then take an online quiz. Now the online quiz works really well when it's more challenging than just knowing facts. But here's a key. I don't give them any feedback. So they know what they were pointed to. They know that they had to read the material, and you might be thinking, well, they can look it up. That's absolutely right. Because in real life, in today's world, we grab our phones, we look things up as we go. We don't say, everything I'm responsible for knowing is what I've memorized in the past. In fact, I don't even like students to memorize certain things. Certain baseline things, yeah, you kind of have to remember. But I really want them to learn and understand and use what they have. So I don't care if they open their book, because I want to write some questions that aren't an easy find, like here's a definition, all I have to do is find it. And frankly, I even use multiple choice. But I try to make things challenging enough that they get a number of right answers, but they don't always get all of the answers right. And they don't know whether they got the answers right or not. They come to class. In my class, we do everything in teams. The idea of the teams is to have them challenged and working together towards a final project. The final project allows them to, forces them to use skills that they've learned and used and demonstrated in this class. And I tell them at the end of the semester, when I sit in the room, along with a colleague who was a faculty member but has played many other roles since, we're going to be judging you on whether you truly demonstrate learning from this class, not baseline learning that you got elsewhere.
When we're in class once a week, it would usually start out with a team exercise that went over the learning that we had done and the readings that we had done throughout the week. And then after that, we would do a summary with Kitzmiller, where he would go through and reiterate the strong key points. And then after that, we would do a quiz, again testing the learning that we had done, and then talk about how that affected our semester project as a whole. It was very concise and very comprehensive.
So let's go back to that quiz. They've taken the quiz. They've done it online. They don't know what their score is. They don't have any feedback about what's right or wrong. They come into the classroom and they sit around a table with their team. Their team is pre-assigned on day one, and frankly, this is not what this is about, but I use a fairly simple matter of having them all line up in a particular way, thinking about how I want teams to be formed, and then count off so that in the end I get the right mix of students in every team. But that's for another time. Right now, let's think about the fact that they show up, they're in a team setting, they've all read the same material. Hopefully, if you have a slacker, it becomes clear to the other team members that you have a slacker and they're relying on their team members to have the knowledge. We can use peer reviews for that, right? So they show up, they've taken the quiz, they get the exact same quiz during class. This time it's on paper, and this time they use a scratch-off form. What's a scratch-off form? Have you ever seen a scratch-off lottery ticket? It's pretty much like that, where if you get the answer correct the first time, you see a star. But if among 5 choices, let's say, you don't get the answer right, you then know you have to discuss it further. I actually did this with a group of faculty. In other words, I sat with faculty and went through a scratch-off form on some materials that we had been given to read. And it was interesting to notice that somebody who was a little noisy and thought they were right would try to influence the group. But if you're doing 10 questions, after a couple of the questions, you realize that the noisy person that thinks they're right might not be right. So you end up really discussing it. And the quiet person says, I don't remember it that way. I really remember it this way, and this is the way I think that plays out. So I rarely see that we have strong influencers in my class, especially after the first couple of these quizzes. I see that they start really discussing and getting into it.
We were expected to do an individual quiz online, which would be 10 questions about our readings for the international marketing. And then on Wednesday, we would take that quiz again as a group, which was interesting because he wouldn't tell us what our grade on the individual quiz was. And so we would sort of have to be able to tell whether or not how confident we were individually and see as a group like what our answers was. Because sometimes I would think I got the right answer on the quiz, but then the majority of my group got a different answer. So you would sort of rely on your group in order to get that answer. And it's actually interesting because overall I got a better grade as a group on the quizzes than I did individually.
The hardest part as an instructor is writing a quiz in a way that you foster that discussion, that they truly can discuss what they're doing and interact with each other. And what we have then in that classroom is peer-to-peer learning. What's the instructor do? Isn't that different? I don't show up with a bunch of PowerPoint slides or a bunch of notes and talk them through it. Well, we've gone from the old sage on the stage of the instructor telling people something to the guide on the side. I sit down at the table with them. I listen to what they're saying. I might say, have you thought about this? Did you consider that?
What we find really useful about that is we're a residential campus, and in class, very often that's a great thing to actually be able to engage with a faculty member, an instructor who's sitting right there. In an online class, it's a way to interact with a faculty member in such a way that you are not just listening, you are talking with him, her, and your fellow students, or with a small group with your faculty member coming in or out and moderating. So there are a lot of flexible ways in which to use class time. I think one of the pitfalls of the flipped classroom, however, is if students are reading in class and you have found yourself simply reiterating the material again in class. You've done all move your lectures outside on video or move the readings to a way in which that students can engage with them themselves, and you still find yourself being an explainer in the middle of class. It's time to take a little bit of time and work through some plans for how you're going to manage classroom time in a way that's very different from the ways faculty have typically done it.
So doing this quiz is really only about the first quarter of a class period, but every time they're in the class then, they're working in a team. And immediately as they finished that quiz, I give them a piece of paper with something to do for that day as a quiz. I call the quiz, and I credit Larry Michelson. You might want to look him up on the web. I credit him with this Pedagogy. I give them something, and I call the quiz a readiness assurance test. They are, once they've completed that quiz and gotten all the answers right, they are ready to move on to the next project. The next project in class is skills-based. They have to do something. It'll be discussion-based. They'll turn in a piece of paper or they'll turn in a final outcome in that class, and I will be able to take it away, look at it. Frankly, I grade those most of the time on a pass-fail. Did they do what I asked? So I don't try to think what's the difference between a 92 and an 89. Instead, I'm saying, did they get through this? Did they do a good job? I can usually put them in three piles. This is really good. Not so much here. It doesn't look like they put up enough effort into it. Or this is kind of the middle ground. And that becomes part of their course grade at the end.
Here at the university, we have a Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, and its consultants are there to help faculty design and think through all the parts of a class, usual/traditional or flipped, or online, or blended, or hybrid. But what our consults do is provide for faculty members the opportunity to learn from someone who's read deeply in the material that has to do with pedagogy, to try out ideas, to work through a course design, to design an assignment with feedback from someone, from a consultant, perhaps to explore technological tools that would be useful both outside the classroom and inside the classroom, and also to think about the ways in which we assess student learning, both in those small assessments I was talking about, the just-in-time teaching assessments, to larger projects and graded papers and research projects, to actual traditional tests that are either essay or multi-op tests. So a consultant can help you talk through your ideas, can help shape the class, can help you generate things and provide examples, and even access to speak with other faculty members who have tried these things before. So the centers, the teaching centers on all campuses, provide a workspace or a sandbox, if you will, for faculty who want to explore. And as consultants, we provide some guidance and some expertise, but also I would say some encouragement and some feedback in terms of what's working and how well our students will engage with it.
Kids was really wonderful. In addition to the textbook, he also provided us with all sorts of resources from major consulting companies and from companies that had just released information relevant to what we were learning. And that was released through the OnCourse website. For example, McKinsey articles, articles from Yum brands. So we really felt as though we were on the cutting edge of the industry. At the same time, we were being able to learn from the greats and use resources such as the 86% that had allowed us to gain insight into business successes of the past.
The instructor, me, needs to become comfortable with sitting around talking to the students. Is there ever a time that I want to tell them something? Yeah. I mean, I'm an instructor, right? I'm used to talking to people. So there are times that during this process, they've done the quiz, they've done some exercise in class. I might want to take 10 minutes. I might want to show them a brief video. I might want to take them through a few slides. But I'm talking 10 minutes, 12 minutes. I mean, in today's world, while we're all looking at our Android or our iPhone, we're used to kind of taking a break and doing something different. So if I spend 10 or 12 minutes with them and kind of go over materials, or often they then request, and isn't this the great part? They say, you know, we took that quiz and we're working on this. Can you explain this? Can you give us some examples of something? I mean, isn't it great when your students are asking you to explain, when your students are asking you to give examples instead of you walk in with some preset lecture? And so that's how the class unfolds. It's interactive. It took me a little while to figure out what to do in the allotted time period, but it works so well to have them being comfortable with using and understanding. It helps move from any concept of I'm going to memorize something to I'm going to know something. I'm going to demonstrate knowledge about something. I'm going to really understand and be able to use something. I love it. I love peer-to-peer learning. I love the idea of a flipped class. I love the concept that you can do things outside of class where the web can be used. I mean, before I walked in to talk to you, I was using the web to look for things myself, things that I use in teaching. Why wouldn't I expect my students to be able to use the web in some way? And then when I do things with people. I do things usually where I'm discussing with people. That's what we're modeling for the students. I think it's great.